Okay, so we were having a little bit of discussion as to whether we would need to toss a coin to see who went first, but that actually is not an issue. So would you please welcome Larry Shilling?
Well, thank you. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you very much. Sometimes people don't say as nice of things about me. So.
Real close to it.
All right. Is that better? Excellent. So, as was mentioned in some of the introduction discussion, we do have a permit application or a seeker process ongoing now for the expansion of the Chemung County landfill. Really, tonight, my presentation is not on, and it's not a discussion about the expansion as much as it is what I thought the topic was, and that is how we manage oil and gas waste, whether it's Chemung County or any of our other facilities. So I am going to do my best to, in 20 minutes, walk you through quite a bit of information. I've got about 18 slides, and we'll see how it goes. The first trick will get to, there we go, begin this to move. So this is what we're talking about. It's the Marcellus and Utica outcrop, or shale. This map is kind of an interesting map. It depicts where the actual Marcellus and Utica shale come to the surface. So where you see the red, that is where the Marcellus comes to the surface. And in fact, that's why the Marcellus is called the Marcellus, is because in Marcellus, New York, it's what the ground is made out of. And the Utica is very similar. It follows kind of the same pattern. So tonight I want to talk about what kinds of waste the oil and gas industry would produce from the Marcellus. And we want to talk about the investigations that Casella has done to understand this kind of waste and how to manage it. And then I've got some information on the volumes that are coming into the facilities, and then a few other considerations. So the first type of solid waste that might come from this kind of an operation would be a sludge. These sludges may come from wastewater treatment facilities. They are built for the treatment of, specifically for the recycling or treatment of the water that comes from the natural gas wells. And sludges may, in fact, have higher levels of norm. Norm, by the way, is naturally occurring radioactive material. So another type of solid waste would be contaminated soil or general waste. So any increase of activity would likely, with trucks, there's going to be trucks that run off the road. They may spill diesel. With any activity, industrial type activity, there are going to be more spills, more cleanups that are associated with that activity. Here's our second speaker. There's also the waste that comes from the folks that work at the well pads. So that general waste is just from people working, doesn't matter where they're working at, so that general waste. And then today, these oil and gas drilling pads, they line the area that they're working in, put a surface on top of it so they don't destroy the liner. And all the work that they do is on top of a liner similar to what the landfill has. And when after they're done developing a pad, they will reduce the size of the pad and remove the liner and some of that material. So some of that material is also part of the general solid waste. Just a picture of a pond and some pads at a drilling site. If you go, all the drill pad sites I've been to don't look like this anymore. This is kind of an old picture. And generally all you really see is you don't see the ponds on the site anymore. Everything's in a tank setting on pad on top of that liner. And they don't generally build those ponds on the site. So then we get to the drill cuttings, which seems to be of most interest to everybody. This is a photo of drill cuttings that was taken at one of our facilities. You can see that it looks like wet mud, and there's a little bit of plastic in it. Most of the vehicles that transport this do line their trucks so they're not spilling material up and down the road. So what are drill cuttings? Drill cuttings are really tiny bits of rock and soil that are forced up out of the well as they drill the hole. So from the top to the bottom, they use a mud to push the drill cuttings as the drill bit advances up from the bottom to the surface. The drill mud gets separated from the heavy solids, and those solids are what make up the drill cuttings. There are generally two types of drilling fluids, so in the management of this material, we drew a line between these two, and that's why this is important. There are oil-based muds, and today I am told that they generally use synthetic oil-based oil, like vegetable oil. In the past, years gone by, the drillers used diesel fuel a lot to make their mud out of, so they've found a better way with this synthetic oil. The other drilling fluid they use is water. So when they drill, my understanding is to basically 1,000 feet. The first 1,000 feet that they drill is a critical zone for them because that's where the fresh water is. And well, all of the drillers, while they're drilling through that first 1,000 feet, will use air or water to bring those cuttings back up. After they get below the 1,000 feet, some might switch to the oil-based mud. Some might wait to switch until they actually get to the kickoff point or where they start turning to go horizontal. So we manage both of these air and water and oil cuttings differently. The drill cutting pad, you can, it's a photo from one of the pads I was on several years ago, but you can see the excavator. So the excavator here is managing the drill cuttings. So as I explained, when the drill cuttings come up with that fluid, they do what they can to separate the solids, but the solids are still wet. So they generally mix something like cement kiln dust or lime or sawdust in with the cuttings to bring the solids content up to about 50–60%. So back in 2009, when this really kind of became an issue, and I would say originally we have taken drill cuttings at our facilities since I've been in New York. I mean, New York is a state that does a lot of drilling and has a lot of natural gas production today. The horizontal and hydraulic high volume fracturing was new to the state and new to the region sometime in 2008, 2009. So we became sort of aware that this was a kind of a new formation and a new process that we needed to understand for managing the waste. We, as the owners and or the responsible parties for these facilities forever, are very concerned with what goes in and how those materials are managed. So it is incumbent on us to protect our liability to understand those waste. We did what we could to research the Marcellus. We heard the same thing everybody else heard, that it was a radioactive shale. And so we needed to find out what that meant. What does that really mean? So in 2009, there just was not much information. I think we found originally 4 or 5 samples that New York State had taken of the actual drill cuttings, and that was it. That was the extent of the knowledge of what we were dealing with. So our greatest concern was radioactivity, and because of that responsibility that we have for those facilities, we initiated a 2-phase study program. First phase was to investigate what was actually there. So go out to the field, get permission, get cuttings that we know is actually from the Marcellus, So we could understand exactly what they represented. And the second phase was to model how that would impact the landfill over a long period of time. So our phase one, we hired a radiation expert that has done a lot of work for the EPA in a lot of cleanups throughout the Northeast, and but had no association with any oil or gas company. Wanted to make sure that they weren't being influenced by anybody else. We took them and we went out to the field in Pennsylvania. We went to the drill rigs. We verified by going into the doghouse where the operators are and where they can show you where the bit is. And we verified that we were actually, the cuttings coming off the rig were actually Marcellus shale cuttings. We went to 4 locations, 4 different rigs, geographically spread out so that if there was some geography, we had heard that some places may be different than others. So we, in a 60-mile radius or so, we went to 4 different rigs. We gathered samples from around the landfills, around our facilities, and the Marcellus samples, just to make sure that we had the right material, we sent to the University of Pittsburgh and had them verify that, yes, in fact, that was Marcellus shale. So we had that done too as CQA. So the results really were that the norm, and radium is the issue of concern. Radium puts off the gamma radiation in a higher fingerprint, and as gamma radiation is obviously the strongest radiation that is emitted, it'll penetrate steel, it'll certainly go through a body, it'll, it's something you can easily detect. So the average concentration of those 4 samples were of the on-site soils around the landfill was 0.9 picocuries per gram. So picocuries per gram was another sort of a new thing to us because we didn't really deal a lot with radioactivity. And it was important for us in this study, for our purpose, to understand what that meant and have some relative comparison. So standing here today, I don't know that I can tell you what picocuries per gram actually means, but I do have some relevant information to compare it to. So the on-site soils was 0.9 picocuries per gram. The average of the drill cuttings was 2.1 picocuries per gram. So in our research, we found that the EPA standard for cleaning up a uranium mill, if there was a bomb factory outside these doors, and they wanted to clean up all the radioactivity, that the cleanup standard for unrestricted use, so that you could build a daycare, an elementary school, a library, whatever it is you want to put on that property, at the surface is 5 picocuries per gram. 6 inches below the surface, it's 15 picocuries per gram. So that started giving us something to compare to. The highest reading we got from any of those 4 samples was 4.3 picocuries per gram, still under the cleanup standard that EPA set for cleaning up sites. We asked our radiation expert to test something that we're more familiar with. They tested fire bricks, same thing that's in your stove, in a fire pit, in a boiler. It tested 4.3 picocuries per gram, so the same as the highest reading we got. We tested sandblast media, and it tested at 19.1 picocuries per gram. So there is a chart in our report that walks through all the results and all the testing that we had done, and we made that part of our report, and it was certainly part of our testimony at Chemung County Landfill's last permitting effort a few years back. So that gave us the information that we needed to go to the second phase of our study. So the first phase is very easy to you can go out, you can see it, you can touch it, you can actually measure what the radioactivity is in the material physically. The second phase is something that you have to rely on modeling, because we're talking about really thousands of years that you have to be able to predict. And it is not unusual for things to be modeled, and there are a lot of good models that have been tested and tried with from different places. We came across an Argonne National Labs model that actually tried to do the same thing, only they did it on a very small scale. So they had modeled the impact to a landfill, but they only used, I forget, it was like 200 tons in a huge landfill, and they isolated that to a very small quantity. And of course, they found that there was no impact to the landfill. But we wanted to, so we took that model, we followed their guidance on how to run the model, and we estimated it at much higher volumes. And really, having found out that the picocuries per gram were so low with the drill cuttings, we just sort of jumped to an assumption. Let's just say that it's 50 picocuries per gram. And at 50 picocuries per gram and a high volume, which the volume that we actually modeled, we used 57% drill cuttings. At 50% drill cuttings, and assuming they're all from the Marcellus Shale, that's really equates to a landfill full of Marcellus Shale 100%. Because in fact, most of the drill cuttings, or a lot of the drill cuttings, come from the vertical part before they get to the Marcellus Shale. So only about half, or 40 to 60% of the drill cuttings are actually from the Marcellus Shale. The rest of it is from all the material that's above it. So with those assumptions in that A&L model, the results were that there was really no danger from the Marcellus Shale being in the landfill. There were probably a couple of best management practices that we should follow. And so those best management practices are keeping the material off the bottom of the landfill. So a landfill is a bit like a bathtub, and the water goes down through it, and then we collect that water and treat it. So to lay it right on the collection zone would not be a wise thing to do. So we stay 6 feet up off the bottom of the landfill. The second thing was, well, it's not really going to impact anybody once the cap is on, but let's just keep it inside the landfill. So we keep the drill cuttings inside the landfill by 10 feet. So that if there's some activity or whatever reason, it's just inside the landfill. There's no reason we can't do that, and it's just another layer of protection. We took a few more precautions, so that was kind of the conclusion of the studies, was those two best management practices, but we took a few more precautions. We installed radiation detectors. Those radiation detectors are sort of the highest grade radiation detectors that you can purchase for installation on a truck scale system. We installed them really not just at Chemung, but all three of our sites that manage oil and gas waste. And specifically at Chemung, those detectors up to today, from 2010 to today, have gone off 3 times. All 3 times have been related to medical waste, and they have never gone off associated with oil and gas waste. So one of those times, of the 3 times, 1 time was a driver. So he had had some procedure. He pulls across the scales, the alarms go off. Part of our protocol, because that's pretty common anymore, is that the truck has to park away from the detectors and the driver has to walk across the scales. And he set the alarm off. And then somebody else drives the truck, and the truck didn't set the alarm off. None of the trucks, even in that case, it was not a load of oil and gas waste. So we can't know, because of HEPA laws, we can't know exactly what he had done. It's not our place to ask, but it was certainly the driver that set the alarms off. So drill cuttings are accepted. The other thing that we did is in New York today, drill cuttings, whether they're oil-based or water-based, are really classified as C&D waste. So C&D stands for construction and demolition. There are obviously materials from construction and demolition is what they call C&D, and this is material from the construction of a gas well. So in today's rules, it is just C&D waste. We went a step further. We said we're going to manage this like an industrial waste or a special waste. So any manufacturing facility, before they bring their material to us, has to prove through testing and a profile application that their material is non-hazardous. So we do the same thing with oil and gas waste today. And we self-imposed those rules. And then we test leachate for radioactivity on a regular basis to make sure that it's not coming out of the landfill. So these are our leachate radioactivity results. You can see that this is a line that represents the sewer limit. If you were going to take something to the sewer department, this is the most that you could ever take to the sewer department. That same sewer department has an effluent limit, and that's what you could discharge to a stream, anything below that line. These 3 dots are the results from our radioactive testing. It's not 0, but it is almost 0. So volume into the landfills, I just pulled 2013, and as you can see, at total, it's 12% for the 3 landfills of the volume and 30% at Chemung. Detectors are sensitive enough to detect very small amounts of radioactivity. Leachate testing has shown that the leachate's orders of magnitude below the discharge limits to a stream. And very important, drill cuttings are not fracking waste. It has nothing to do with fracking. The drill rig moves away. Fracking people come in. Drilling's drilling. And there have been no measurable impacts to our landfills. And that's it. Thank you. I'm gonna get your hand up.